All right, so what I want to talk about today is something that, depending on other classes that you've had with me, may be a bit of a repetition, but I still think it bears repeating because it's the foundation of the visual work that we do as directors. And it's funny, I'm speaking about storyboarding, and the thing about it, the thing I get constantly, the complaint, oddly, that I get about storyboarding, or the reaction I get from directors sometimes about storyboarding is this. Why do I got a storyboard? Which drives me crazy. We are in a visual medium. This is not, obviously the evolution of cinema in many ways comes from stage, although you'd be surprised how much preconceptualization goes on in the mind of a theater director as to where people should be blocking-wise. There is visualization, but the point is that there's no photography involved in theater. It's not recorded. It's not image-oriented, even though there's visuals in a theatrical production. You don't walk away from a play and go, I remember that shot, or that shot resonates. So if any film is a collection of shots, one image after another, that's all a film is, then why shouldn't there be the same amount of attention that one lavishes on the drafts of a script? I mean, you guys are all going through this process in one way, shape, or form of script revisions, rewriting and rewriting. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. This isn't motivated. Why would this character do this? The plot stalls here. This is where it doesn't make sense. So you guys spend, and this also, by the way, happens in the studio world, in the professional world, you can spend years in development fiddling over the script. And yet, for some directors, this photographic component, which I would argue, after the script is locked, is the largest, most important thing, which is how am I going to shoot this, is left in many ways to whim. Because either one, the director does not want to do the homework, even though that's a bad word, because I don't think it's homework. Either because the director mysteriously doesn't want to set down in any way, shape, or form the images that may be floating around in their head and relies upon memory and instinct and intuition and just the energy of the moment to come up with the shot that's supposed to accompany this chunk of text that you labored over for years. It just seems crazy to me. So hopefully none of you have this aversion to putting down, and I don't mean in Frank Miller style artwork. I'm talking about putting pen to paper or pencil to paper and scribbling the shots that are, first of all, if the shots, if you read your script and you're not seeing this shot, goes to this shot, goes to this shot, in one way or another, you're in trouble. You cannot rely upon grade school coverage principles to get anything that's remotely interesting on film. If you go, I don't know what I'm shooting, but I know I need to get a master shot, over the shoulders, close-ups, and inserts, guess what? Your movie is going to look like every other movie, every sitcom, TV movie, whatever you want to call it. There's no individuality in that. So if you care about the original quality of your script, then you have to care about the original visual conception. So, for example, I came across this recently, and it made me very excited in a really nerdy way. This is a page and a quarter of Akira Kurosawa's script for Seven Samurai. So if you haven't seen Seven Samurai, write it down, because every filmmaker's grandmother has seen Seven Samurai. Because everybody who is a visual director of any quality bows to Akira Kurosawa. Akira Kurosawa's storyboards, two things that are important to point out. I think this will make all you people who are afraid of drawing, because that's the second thing I get. Besides not wanting to do it, the second excuse is, well, I can't draw, so forget it, I don't need to do that. Well, all you have to do is look at these images to know that there is absolutely no illustration skill. Kurosawa didn't need to be in Illustrator in order to create timeless images. All he had to do was scribble down what was a representation, an impression of what was in his head. And moreover, that this shot would follow this shot, would follow this shot. A succession of shots. One of the things I talk about constantly in our directing classes is to backing into directing from an editorial perspective. What that means is trying to see the movie in an edited fashion before you shoot it. Before you shoot it. As opposed to a collection of a million images that a mystical, magical wizard editor will seemingly somehow put together into a movie. Again, if you're the author, I'm talking about, there's two authors of the film. There's the original writer who's the author, but ultimately the director is the final author of the film. You're writing in images. Again, you're the composer of the visual music. They've given you the libretto for the opera. It's all written down. It's a bunch of words. But what is the music? So the music is the individual shots, and more importantly, it's the shots structure. This moment is comprised of X number of shots in this sequence. So it's important, I think, it's only one method. I'm not saying it's the only method, but I think it's important to see the finished sculpture in the block of clay, as they say. In other words, when you look at Mount Rushmore, there's some kind of sculpting which is carved out of a mountain, right? It's carved out of a mountain. So how do you sculpt that? Well, you're not just putting rocks together to make a face. You're starting with a big giant mountain and you're chipping away pieces so that this is revealed underneath. The only way the sculptor is able to do that is if they see in their mind exactly what that is. Otherwise, chip away, oh, I just knocked off George Washington's nose. Oops, sorry, I don't know. Can't go back. So this is when I say seeing the sculpture in the block of clay or in the stone, I think that's a way to think. And it really boils down to, what are your shots? Now, that doesn't mean that this can't change. This can totally change. This does not mean that you are a slave to your preconception. All it means is that you go in with some sort of plan. You go in there with some sort of visual plan. I don't know if you watch football. If you watch football, which I don't watch a lot of football, it just looks like every play, they're just doing something. But each one of those plays has been laid out exactly what they're supposed to do. So in a way, a football game, which is a live thing, has actually been orchestrated. This is exactly what we're going to do. These are the moves, or these are the shots for this given play. So for every sequence, I think that's what you got to think about. Now, the other thing that's important about Kurosawa's thing here, which is the fact that, number one, he cannot draw. That it's just an impression, a reminder. So it's like when you know what it is when you scribble your own notes, when you say, well, no one can understand my notes, but you can understand them. It reminds you, yeah, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. The other important thing is that he's happened to, and this is just one method of doing it, drawn it on the script. He's actually drawn it physically on the script. The movement from text, which is a script, to images is a translation that only the director can do. No, I'm sorry. Not only the director, anybody can do it, but I would argue that if the director doesn't do it, it's not the director's movie. It's somebody else's movie. You can go, I don't know what to shoot here, and the DP goes, I got a shot. Okay, cool. And that's fine too, but if why are you a director? Most people are directors because they are control freaks. The only reason to be a director is so that you have this thing in your mind that you want to set down. And I always envy, I've always said this, I envy the singular arts, which is like the poet who gets up out of bed and goes, I got a poem. He writes it down, it's done. Or I'm a painter, I paint. Or I come up with a song and I get my guitar out and I play and it's done. Film is this whole thing where your inspiration as an artist has to be filtered through 1 trillion people till it finally gets to what was in your head. That's why they say, that's why I've always said, and everybody says this, if you get 50% of what you actually originally intended, you're a success. If you get 50%, if you only get half of it, because there's so many things you got to weave through, so many bodies and people that you have to process this original image through. So why go through all that trouble? Why take on all that responsibility? Just so you can say action and cut and be looked at as the guy in charge? It isn't worth it. It's too painful not to take possession of the material. So I think that there is something to doing this translation as it happens. If the script says, and I don't read Japanese, but if it says, Joe and Alan walk down the road talking, Joe says he doesn't want to die. You just start to say, this is going to be a shot. This moment's probably going to be a shot. This is not a math equation. You shouldn't sit there and go, what's a shot? I think you should do this when you're half asleep. I think you should get up in the morning and be like half awake, put down your script and start scribbling things, because in a way, this is not engineering, this is art. So you want to reach for the image from inside, not from a cerebral place, but from an emotional place. And that's why occasionally you can be on set and go, ooh, I got a shot. That'll work. That totally works. But it cannot work for the whole thing. And from a practical, and by the way, any producer will tell you, doing this just saves time. Because there's going to be plenty of moments where you're like being pulled in 32 different directions, and your DP's going to go, what's the next setup? What's the next setup? And you're going to go, and they go, I know, we're doing this one. Again, when I found storyboards by Stanley Kubrick, they were also encouraging because he was following sort of the same Kurosawa principle, where he wasn't writing them exactly on the script, but he was drawing them on the page opposite. So it's almost like this corresponds to this. There's nobody more specific visually than Stanley Kubrick. I mean, when you watch a Stanley Kubrick movie, you can see that the cigarette in the ashtray in deep background has been angled at a particular degree because he wanted it that way. And yet, look at these drawings. And yet you can still detect what the composition of the shot is. The art of the picture is not important. Who cares? You're not publishing a graphic novel. If you give thumbnails, as we call them, or your own sketches to a storyboard artist, they will make them prettier, but the point is, to what end? Now, if you're raising money and you want to get somebody excited about what this thing looks like, your dentist in Idaho who's going to give you money is not going to look at this and go, oh, that's really exciting. I can see what you're trying to do. But the dentist in Idaho sees some glammed up Frank Miller-style storyboards. They're going to be, ooh, cool. Yeah, now I get it. In fact, one of the stories about Ridley Scott, who happens to draw very beautiful storyboards just because he was an illustrator, if you know about the first Alien in 1979, that was meant to be a very low-budget picture. And when Fox saw his storyboards, they gave him a pile more money. They said, okay, we see this now. This looks huge. We thought this was going to be a cheesy little Roger Corman sort of monster in a rubber suit space thing, but I see that you have this vision, quite large vision. And they gave him the money. And by the way, he drew every shot in the movie. Every shot. Not just a random sampling of shots. Every single shot. And that was another way of impressing upon the studio, wow, this guy sees the movie. Anywhere you go, I mean, they're not exactly, but they're pretty damn close. And that's neither good nor bad. What I'm saying is the guy saw the movie in his head. But you don't need to be intimidated. I think the ability to draw is totally unimportant. Michael Chapman, who is one of the great DPs, had this to say about Martin Scorsese's storyboards, which again follow the kind of Stanley Kubrick, Kurosawa, I can't draw, but I'm going to set down every shot principle.
And Marty's storyboards are an exception. Somewhere I have the original storyboards for Taxi Driver. If I could go through papers, I could find them, but I don't know where they are. But his were very deliberately just diagrams, stick figures, and arrows saying, and then the camera goes like that. And then you move up. And it was in no way drawn or carefully done. They were simply diagrams of energy.
And so diagrams of energy, if you look at some of these boards from Taxi Driver, for the conclusion, which is the big shootout, look at the bottom right, which is Travis coming up the hallway, about to blow the first pimp's hand off. And again, I've talked about these things before. How do you indicate movement? How do you indicate movement if your storyboard in a static thing, which is a drawing? Well, arrows are a good thing. Arrows can indicate whether you're going to move the camera in a particular direction. Just watch how the sequence, which is a sequence of violence, which, by the way, we've talked about this, if you have an action sequence or a stunt sequence, these are particularly important to storyboard because usually they are built in montage. These things work. A fight scene works because it's a series of very specific images put together in the right order. Watch this. Hey! I mean, just if you look at this sequence by itself, it's pretty interesting. I mean, when he blows the pimp's hand off, so there's this, jumping into a tighter shot. Then it cuts to these like static shots of different parts of the apartment, which are just where you hear the ricochet, the echo of the gunshot, which you would think is an editorial thing. Oh, cool, I'll just cut some, I'll find that in the editing. Well, he already thought about it. Hey! And then you got a shot like this with Jodie Foster turning, reacting, because she's the prostitute, the 13-year-old prostitute that's about to be rescued. And she turns, and you'll notice here at the bottom here, the notations and how it's not just the composition of the shot, it says candles in background. And he's drawn the candles. So this is a guide, obviously. If you can't think of what's in the background, well, your production designer certainly will. But if you want to direct your production designer, then this is a good place to start. Look, these candles happen to be there. By the way, he's written here 48 frames. Does anybody know what that means? Slow motion. 48 frames per second, meaning that he knew at that moment that he wanted her turn to be slowed down just a little bit. Now, in the digital age, that's something you can do in post, but in the film age, you really have to do it by over-cranking the camera to 48 frames per second, and if you watch Jodie Foster's reaction, it's imperceptible, but it is in slow motion. Him getting shot in the neck. Him getting shot on the neck. Now you'll see here things that, you know, for example, in his mind, in Scorsese's mind when he got up at 2 in the morning to draw this, after this shot where Harvey Keitel gets plugged, he had this idea of going outside the door, because this is a front door of an apartment, to go outside to see him like busting through the glass from behind. And he writes here, from behind. But maybe he ran out of time, maybe he realized he didn't need it, whatever. So again, it's not that you're a slave to your storyboard, but the concept is there from the beginning. Inserts are there too. There's just tons of notes here. So a storyboard, and this also benefits you if you can't draw. If it's not clear because of your scrappy stick figure, write what it's going to be. Extreme close-up, pans left to right, dollies in, blah, 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 blah. You see, the thing is that nothing will tell you how important a shot is to you than sitting down and drawing it. If you just have to make a shot list, anybody can make a shot list. You can just go long shot, over the shoulder, blah, blah, blah. It takes 2 seconds. But if you sit down and go, okay, I'm going to draw this thing, suddenly it has value. It has weight because you're taking the time to draw it. Then you go, yeah, maybe I don't need that. And also, by the way, when you look at your storyboards, you'll also be able to decide if you're running out of time, I can lose this. Like I can cut this because I can see that this shot will cut to this shot and still make sense if I lose these 2 shots. That way you can look at it in some kind of way that gives you an understanding of the overall. The only time I don't sort of draw on the script is when it's a purely visual thing, like a commercial, where there is no script to speak of. So, I did this stupid Pizza Hut commercial, and it's a stupid Pizza Hut commercial, and it's about a meat pizza, and I'm a vegetarian, and all that, so it's stupid. But I still had to plan the sucker out. And I did the same, I did basically storyboards for everything in this thing. And like, for example, you can see that I just try to, I had to see what this is going to be. So this is people in robot war fights kind of stuff, fighting over pizza. But whatever, opening shot.
People will stop at nothing to get a piece of Pizza Hut's new Hot Dog Bites pizza.
Pizza Hut has a new Hot Dog Bites pizza? Now that's genius.
But it had to take place very quickly, and there's no room for this. So it all takes place in like a Fight Club type warehouse. Here's the wide shot. I had already thought about the lighting design for this thing, that it was going to be a dark club with shafts of light illuminating. This is where this lighting design comes from. I had already drawn these beams of light. I had this idea that a beam of light comes down and illuminates the stupid pizza in the wide shot. I had the idea that basically, if you see inside here, I drew these dotted lines here, dot, 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 and these arrows, which indicate the snap zoom. So this is the beginning of the frame, but then it crash zooms in on the pizza, and that's this first shot. So what I ended up doing was, I did this when I shot it, but then I ended up using this crash zoom instead on this shot here. So the concept was still there, but essentially if you look at the pizza shot, that's that shot. And then every single shot here, whether it's the EQ of the styled pizza, I said rotating, I'm not sure, the push-ins on the actual participants, looking at each other,
People will stop.
all that is drawn out. When I was first starting out, and I continue to do this, I drew right on the script, and I think it's a way of doing it that's very effective. Some of you saw that have seen this already, but like this is from like my second feature, and that's what my script looks like. It's like the shots, these are the shots that relate to that text. So the translation is happening as I do, and I just start. Now I didn't sit down before I shot the whole movie and storyboarded. I didn't storyboard the whole thing. Sometimes I would just storyboard the scenes that were clear in my head. But if I knew I was shooting this scene the next day, that night I'd be at my desk doing this because I wanted to have it in my mind. I wanted my mind to be on the page. And again, these are not fancy drawings, but I do have the same kind of description here where it says slow zoom on Scott. So I have an arrow here depicting the zoom. Long dissolve, slow dolly. I even put a question mark, zoom. I'm not sure if this is a dolly or a zoom. Jump cuts, even editorial things, lighting things, backlit. So I just kind of scratched out his face here because I was thinking that maybe this is a backlit. There's no reason why you can't start thinking about these things, whether it's the candles in the background, the quality of the lighting, the composition. All these things are ultimately going to be a decision you're going to have to make. Why make them all on the day? Like I said, I mean, it's intimidating when you see Ridley Scott storyboards because they look like art. They are beautiful. You could just publish this. But the point of the storyboard is not to publish it and sell the storyboard. The point of the storyboard is to guide you in the making of the movie. It's fascinating to see the quality of some of these things, having seen the movie, and to go, wow, this is really close. Psycho has one of the most laid out sequences, the shower scene, and you can see, I talk about an editorial thought process where one shot leads to the other, and on and on and on. Or the other intimidating things are like Apocalypse Now, where you see storyboards of the helicopter attack, and they're like paintings, but they don't have to be. What's important is the preconceptualization. If you're looking at somebody if you know somebody who'll do storyboards for you, when you go shoot that, whose movie are you making? You don't want to, God, don't look at it like, oh, I'm going to get somebody to do my homework for me and I'll just turn it in and no one will know any better. But you'll know when you see those shots that they're not yours. And I do it up to this day. I did a picture that just came out, and the opening has this guy walking down this abandoned hospital corridor, and it's a steady cam shot as he goes along. And that's this. See? And it's not even, it's hardly a good drawing. But there it is. It shows the corridor.
Exactly like.
That's the shot. Good or bad, whether you would shoot it this way or not, the point that I'm making is that I had an idea, I committed to it, and I shot it. And on the occasion where I set something up and I said, I don't like this anymore, I changed it. But at least I came up with a plan. So this would be my guidelines to you, is to do this kind of work for all the reasons that I explained. I think one of the things that Michael Chapman said, the DP of Raging Bull and Taxi Driver, he once said, it's important that storyboards not be artistic. Because if they're artistic, it's done. It's a painting just hanging on a wall. You don't even need to make the movie. So in a way, to your point, that sort of just essence of the shot does what we're talking about. It reminds you of what it is. It makes it very clear what you're going for. And that is the seed which grows the mighty oak of the image. But it's not the image itself. It's just the beginning. I think, again, doing it but not thinking too hard about it while you do it, which also enables you to just be kind of sloppy. It's like you look at another Stanley Kubrick storyboard, and he's just like, opening shot. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. And, he's seeing it, he's setting it down, boom. The more clearly you see it, the greater chance of it getting set down. Like I said, because you have to filter your thing through so many different people, so many opinions, so many meetings, so many brains, there's something enormously satisfying when you have something and it actually winds up there in that 50%.